In this video, I'll be talking about wireless spectrum and wireless channels. What are they? Why do we need to know about wireless channels? How that is going to help us in identifying the sight impairment? Is that going to improve our understanding of the wireless problems? And so on. Wireless comes under electromagnetic spectrum. Spectrum is a key word. When you know spectrum, what is that all about? An electromagnetic spectrum is a range of all types of radiations. It's not just one radiation. Anything which emits electromagnetic radiation, then we include them in the spectrum. A spectrum, in a way, that it's called from A to Z. It covers everything. If you are looking into electromagnetic spectrum, it starts from gamma rays, go all the way to the conventional radios, which we use, FM, AM radios, and so on. We are now specifically interested in wireless signals which are used for data communication, which falls under what is called IEEE 802.11 standard. When you are looking into that operates on a microwave range. In electromagnetic spectrum, some are licensed, some are free to use. Why government has to restrict a licensing scheme? That's typically because of various uses. For example, if you look into your airport communication, they use to communicate with the flights at certain frequency. They don't want someone to go and interfere. So that causes a lot of problems. So they don't want anyone to go and interfere. So that is why they restrict that no one can use that particular spectrum. They reserve it for certain purpose. The same thing if you look into police, they use certain licensed bands through which they communicate. Then marine people, they use certain bands to communicate. Even if you look into television, they use certain bands to communicate. Radios, they use certain bands to communicate, and so on. So those are all the licensed band where you are not supposed to use. When we come for data communication, we use a band which was license free but typically reserved for the purpose of industrial, scientific, and medical use. It's called ISM. So we use, for wireless signals, we use an ISM band which are reserved. So now we will dive more into the details of the 802.11 wireless bands, how it's been divided into various channels, and so on. Before we dive further into looking into channels, looking into spectrum, and so on, we look at this very simple example. Then that enhances your understanding that what's the meaning of a spectrum, what's the meaning of a channel. Wireless channel and wireless spectrum, consider the following example. You consider a freeway traffic. So you know all about freeway, like how it look like and so on. So when I talk about it, the freeway typically has like this. So typically, you have the road. So that's the width of the road. So the width of the freeway, that's considered as the spectrum. So in that width, so what normally happens is that actually they are split into various lanes. So I would just say, so this is one lane, this is another lane, this is another lane, this is another lane, this is another lane, and so on. This is the another lane. So this typically got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So typically, so what happens is that it got 6 lanes. In these 6 lanes, you can go. In a similar language, in wireless, each of the spectrum is divided into what is called a channel. So each lane is equivalent to a channel, wireless channel, in which one transmitter can propagate. So what happens is that then typically, so here, so one will use it. Then the next one, another one will use this one. Then maybe like another node will use another channel. Another node will use the channel, and so on. So that means that at this some point of time you have 6 channels available, then 6 independent transmitter can simultaneously use the entire available spectrum. So that's what happens in reality. You need to understand this very clearly. So there are 2 things you need to know about typically a spectrum and channel. So the spectrum is typically the entire width, then channel is each of the sub widths within the spectrum. It's considered as a channel. So now what happens if another node also transmit in channel 1? So that means that, as you can just see clearly, so there'll be a sort of collision, or in wireless it's not called collision, it's basically interference. So you have an interference if 2 transmit at the same channel. In the same way, but what about something like this? If someone is actually transmitting like this, so they are not actually doing it in one channel, they are typically taking in the middle of 2 and 3, which is also not permissible. So they are actually going to interfere with channel 2 as well as channel 3. You can also think of another possibility. What if someone actually takes 2 channels? So they are interfering now with 2 and 3. So this particular one is interfering with channel 2 as well as channel 3, which is not preferable. So these are all the things we will look into when we do a site impairment analysis, that what's happening. Normally when you are talking about a channel, so for example take this one, this is a channel. So this is typically, this one, it's called the width of the channel. So this is the channel width. Usually within this channel we will have a very narrow band at both the corner. So this is usually not used. This particular one, it's not used. So you only use the rest of this one starting from here to here. So people use it here to here. So this band is actually called a God band. God band. So this particular area is actually not used. It's used when actually the energy spill into. So sometimes the energy, they don't actually restrict within that particular one, so they can spill a little bit into. So that's called God bands. So every channel will have God bands at both the ends. This is to protect that it actually doesn't go into the next channel and interfere. So when we talk about channel 1, channel 2 is called adjacent channel. If you are looking into 2, then 3 and 1 are called adjacent channel. For 3, 2 and 4 are adjacent channels, and so on. So at the end, What we learn from this simple example, again, anything you need to think of a channel and a spectrum, just imagine about a freeway, how a road is being cut it into several lanes in the road. So that each lane is called a channel in wireless. Then the width of the lane is called typically width here. Then a wireless transmission takes one channel at a time, so that, and they are restricted within one channel. However, we are going to see in the future that sometimes we may combine two channels. So, for example, you have seen in cases that where there is a big truck, when there is a huge truck going, what happens? So that huge trucks actually take a big sort of two lanes. So whenever it goes, then there'll be, you have seen that there'll be more, like in the front there is a car, at the back there is a car, and saying that this is a long truck or a lengthy truck and a big one. So there'll be two people taking that. So these are all some exceptions. Same thing that we are going to look at some exceptions. Then sometimes there may be more channels being used by single transmission that we are going to see as an exception and so on. For data communication, as of today, wireless LAN signals uses two spectral range. One, we call it as 2.4 gigahertz range, another one 5 gigahertz range. In the 2.4 gigahertz range, it is split into channel. Each one is 5 megahertz apart from each other. In the case of a 5 gigahertz range, the channel width is 20 megahertz. When it comes to the channel formation, it gets very complicated when you go into 5 gigahertz. 2.4 gigahertz is very simple, but I would say that it's not efficiently designed. When you're looking into 5 gigahertz, it's designed with so much of things we learn from the past experience. So we last look into the 2.4 gigahertz spectral range. Observe this is the entire spectral range. So if you look into, this is channel 1, it's centered around 2.412. Channel 2 is 2.417. As I told you, each one is separated at 5 megahertz. So then it just goes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. Again, these are all different in different countries. If you are looking into certain countries, they may have 11 channels, like for example, America got 14 channels and so on. This picture is taken from ICAO website, so I give a due respect and acknowledgement to those people. When we talk about transmission, your wireless transmission takes 22 megahertz, out of which you use 20 megahertz, then this side 1, the other side 1, the 2 megahertz is used for guard band. So typically it's 20 megahertz, put it in this way, 20 megahertz. When you talk about 20 and you are talking about the channel width of 5 megahertz, it doesn't make the max correct. So that is why what happens is that if you look into channel 1, it actually goes all the way up to 3. If you're looking into channel 2, it goes all the way up to 4. Then if you're looking into channel 3, it goes all the way from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes up to channel 5. So that means this is actually the relation. Channel 1 and channel 2 overlap. So how much it overlap? So typically this particular portion is overlapping. So this much is overlapping. Then channel 1 is overlapping with channel 3. Channel 1 is overlapping with channel 4. Channel 1 is also overlapping with channel 5 a bit. Channel 1 overlap. This is channel 5, so it goes here. So this particular region overlaps. This particular overlaps with channel 1. Then channel 6 and channel 1, they don't overlap. Then if you look into 6, it overlaps with 7, 8, 9, 10. On the other hand, it overlaps with 2, 3, 4, 5. The same way channel 11, it overlaps with 7, 8, 9, 10 and then 12, 13, 14. So even though you got 11 channels or 14 channels, what we can use is only 3 channels. In 2.4 gigahertz, this is one of the biggest problem. You got 11 channels available or 14 channels depending on the country you live in, out of which there are only 3 non-overlapping channels. It's 1, 6, 11. So everybody tried to use one of these channels so that they can get the full bandwidth. So what happened if can't I not use channel 1 and 2 together? The answer is yes. You can use channel 1, somebody else can use channel 2. But the problem is that there's so much of, so up to here it's common. So the common sort of a thing, it's going to interfere, for which the coding use a different technology so that it slows down. You don't get the full bandwidth, you only get partial bandwidth and so on. So that's about 2.4 gigahertz wireless range. When we go into the 5 gigahertz wireless range, this is absolutely sort of a different and challenging compared to the 2.4. In 2.4, we all got fixed width of 22 megahertz. Like each transmission uses 20 megahertz channel with 2 megahertz of God band. When you go here, you have 20 megahertz non-overlapping channels. So like 46, 36, 40, 44, 48, 52, 56, 60, 64. So it goes all the way to 165. These are all 20 megahertz non-overlapping channels. It is not like 2.4. 2.4, it is a bad design. We learn from our experiences. So that is why it's not repeated onto 5 GHz. The same mistake is not repeated onto the 5 GHz wireless channel. You got 20 megahertz which are non-overlapping. So you can use 36, someone can use 40 without any issue. Then 40, another person can use 44. Again, there are no issues and so on. So each of these 20 megahertz can be used without overlapping with each other. Now, going back to the question, I want more bandwidth. How can I do that? I want more channel width. What can I do that? You can combine two 20 megahertz channel, adjacent to 20 megahertz channels to form a 40 megahertz channel. So for example, 36 and 40 can be combined to call a channel number 38, which is 40 megahertz. The same way, the two adjacent channels 44 and 48 can be combined to form 46. So now that comes to the question. If someone uses 38, if someone else uses 40, yes, that's going to interfere. Definitely that's going to interfere and cause trouble. If someone uses 38, then if somebody else uses 44 and 48, it's not going to cause any issue, because this 38, you can't use 36 and 40, but these two are again, they are separated. 40 and 44 and 48, they have no interference with 38. So the same way, if I want still more, I can take two adjacent 40 megahertz channels to create an 80 megahertz channel. Then you can take two 80 megahertz channels to create an 160 megahertz channel, and so on. So this is how the 5 gigahertz range work. So now you need to be very careful when you are evaluating some sort of a problems in your wireless network. Could be that somebody is using a 40 megahertz, then someone else is using a 20 megahertz but within the interfering range. You understand typically the whole design very clear and carefully, because a good understanding will able to make yourself more comfortable to analyze the problem in the Wi-Fi network and then do any fix. To recap, look at your 2.4 gigahertz wireless channel. There are 14 channels. Each one is of 5 megahertz in width. Each channel takes 20 megahertz. So that's why if one channel interfere with other channels, even though they have 14, you cannot use 14. You can only use 3 non-overlapping channels. If you have, so this is a mistake. This is a mistake in the design. People learn from experience. If you go to the 5 gigahertz spectrum, we don't make the same mistake again. So typically we got 20 megahertz. They are all non-overlapping channels. Two 20 megahertz non-overlapping adjacent channels can be combined to form a 40 megahertz. Then two adjacent 40 megahertz can be combined into 80 megahertz channel. Then again 280 can be combined into make 160 megahertz channels, and so on. So this is a quick introduction to wireless spectrum and channel. So my next topic will be on RF behavior and the implication. So what are actually, now that we know about RF channels, then what the next property would be, that what are the RF behavior. So we are going to look into that in the next video.